She wasn't supposed to talk to guests. Hotel staff like Emma Johnson followed rules, not instincts. But that night, a little boy stood alone in the lobby, crying in silence. No sound, no words, only desperate signs for help. He was mute, deaf, terrified, and everyone else pretended not to see him. When Emma responded in sign language, his entire face changed: relief, hope, connection. What she didn't know was that the child she'd helped was Liam Cole, the son of one of New York's most powerful billionaires. Adrian Cole, a man built from ice and control, had everything except peace. No teacher, no therapist, no expert had ever reached his son, until a hotel maid broke the rules. Now, with his world turned upside down, Adrian gives Emma 48 hours to decide. He couldn't have been more than 7, standing near the lobby fountain with tear-streaked cheeks and trembling hands. His gestures were quick, desperate, full of meaning no one around him could understand. A few guests tried to help, but when they realized he couldn't speak or hear, they awkwardly stepped back. One even whispered something about calling security before walking away. The boy's silence turned into everyone's excuse to ignore him. From behind my cleaning cart, I couldn't stop watching. We weren't allowed to interact with guests, especially not on our own. If anyone spoke to me, I was supposed to direct them to the front desk and move on. But watching him stand there alone, signing into emptiness, I felt something twist inside me. Observation wasn't enough anymore. I needed a plan, something subtle, something that wouldn't get me fired, at least not immediately. I accidentally dropped a stack of napkins right near him, pretending to be annoyed at myself. He didn't react to the sound, but when he saw me crouch down beside him, his teary eyes followed every movement. While pretending to gather the mess, I signed softly, "Are you okay?" His little hands froze mid-air, disbelief spreading across his face. Then came a small, cautious sign back, "Help," and that one word hit harder than any rule in the handbook. He signed again, slower this time, "Dad, gone." My chest tightened. I nodded, pretending to focus on the napkins while my mind raced. I knew I was crossing a line, but how could I just walk away? He trusted me instantly, and I couldn't betray that. For a brief, quiet moment, the chaos of the lobby disappeared. Then I noticed the reflection in the glass doors. Someone had entered and everyone suddenly stood still. The glass doors slammed open so hard that everyone turned at once. The sound of footsteps echoed across the marble floor, steady, deliberate, and full of authority. The boy froze instantly, his eyes wide with recognition. A tall man in a dark suit entered, surrounded by 2 security guards who scanned the lobby like they owned it. Every conversation stopped. You could feel power just walking in. The boy ran to him before anyone could react, throwing his small arms around the man's waist. The father immediately bent down to his level, calm but firm. His hands began to move, clear, practiced gestures that said, "It's okay, I'm here now, Dad's got you." The boy's tears slowed, replaced by relief so pure it hurt to watch. You could tell this wasn't the first time they'd used that kind of silence to talk. The man's grey eyes softened for a second, before hardening again as he looked around the room. He spotted me near the reception counter, still half crouched, my cleaning cloth forgotten in my hand. His gaze lingered on me longer than it should have, sharp and calculating, like he was trying to fit me into a story that didn't make sense. I straightened up, not sure if I should apologize or run. One of his guards whispered something to him, but the man lifted a hand to stop him. The boy pointed at me again, signing fast, his gestures full of excitement. The father followed every motion carefully, his expression shifting just enough to show surprise. Then his attention came back to me, steady, unreadable, and too direct. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but heavy. "You understand, my son?" The question hung in the air. "You understand, my son?" And for a moment, no one in the lobby even breathed. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried the kind of weight that demanded answers. I swallowed hard, realizing how small I looked in front of him, still in my housekeeping uniform and clutching a half-damp cloth. The boy, still holding onto his father's sleeve, signed something fast and excited, and that softened the man's expression just slightly. The father looked down at his son again, replying in sign language with precise, steady hands. "You're safe now. Dad's here." The boy nodded, clinging to him like he'd found his whole world again. Watching them made something twist inside me. It was a mix of relief and panic, and when the man looked back at me, I finally understood why everyone in that lobby went quiet the second he walked in. "I didn't mean to interfere," I said quietly, trying to sound professional, even though my heart was racing. He just looked scared. His gaze flicked to my name tag, then back to my face, unreadable. Emma Johnson, he repeated, as if committing it to memory. Then, with the faintest hint of a smile that wasn't really a smile, he said, "You broke the hotel's rules to help him." The boy tugged his sleeve again, signing quickly, and the man nodded. "My son says you talked to him." His tone softened a little, but his eyes stayed sharp. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, trying not to sound nervous. "Thank you," he added simply. He turned toward the exit with his son in his arms, but as he walked away I noticed the hotel manager, watching me from across the room, and the look on his face told me I was in trouble. By the time I returned to the staff corridor, my heart hadn't slowed down. I kept replaying his voice in my head, the way he said my name like it meant something important. But that moment didn't last long. The hotel manager was waiting near the service desk, arms crossed, expression tight. "Emma, in my office." Now, his tone told me everything before the words did. Someone had seen me talking to a guest. Inside the small office, he didn't bother to sit. "You know the rules. You don't engage with guests. You don't make personal contact. You especially don't kneel on the floor of the lobby signing to them." His words came fast, rehearsed. I tried explaining, saying the boy was alone and scared, but it didn't matter. His mind was made up. "We can't risk upsetting high-profile clients," he said. "Turn in your badge after your shift." I walked out numb, my uniform suddenly feeling too tight. Around me, people whispered in the halls, pretending not to look. Still, I couldn't shake the image of that boy's face. The way he'd clung to his father, how quickly he'd calmed when someone finally understood him. It wasn't regret I felt. It was something closer to peace. Even if it cost me this job, at least I'd done something right. That night I stayed late to finish cleaning the conference wing. As I passed the glass doors near the front lobby, I froze. The man from earlier, the billionaire, stood outside talking to the hotel's general manager. He wasn't looking at him, though. He was looking straight at me through the glass. No anger, no accusation, just quiet curiosity, like he was already planning something I couldn't see coming. The next morning I came back to the hotel just to finalize my termination papers. The whole walk there I told myself it didn't matter. It wasn't the first job I'd lost and it wouldn't be the last. But deep down, the way that man looked at me last night kept replaying in my mind. I tried to shake it off. I just wanted to hand in my badge and leave quietly. When I stepped into the lobby, the same manager who fired me looked pale as paper. "Emma," he said, clearing his throat, "you need to wait here for a moment." Before I could ask why, the elevator doors opened. Adrian Cole walked out like he'd never left, calm, sharp, and completely out of place in a building like this. Every employee straightened as if the air had changed. He didn't even glance around. His eyes found me instantly. He stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets, voice low but commanding. "Miss Johnson," he said, "I hope I didn't cost you your job." I blinked, too stunned to answer. He continued, "My son hasn't stopped signing your name since last night. You managed what teams of therapists couldn't." His tone wasn't flattery. It was fact. I told him I was only trying to help, but he shook his head slightly, almost amused. "You did more than that." Then he reached into his jacket and handed me a business card. "I don't make offers twice," he said. "You have 48 hours to decide if you'll come work for me as my son's communication assistant." I stared at the card, my name still stitched on my faded uniform. In one day I'd lost everything, and somehow gained a choice I never saw coming. 2 days later, I stood outside a black SUV that looked far too expensive to even park near. I'd spent both nights convincing myself I wouldn't call him, that I'd move on. But curiosity has a way of winning when life stops making sense. So there I was, suitcase in hand, being escorted by one of his assistants, who spoke as little as possible. I wasn't sure if I was walking into a dream or a mistake. When we reached the Cole residence, the gates opened silently, revealing a world that didn't belong to people like me. The house looked more like a museum than a home. Glass, steel, and perfection everywhere. Even the air felt rehearsed. I tried not to stare, but it was impossible not to. For a second I thought about turning around, but the driver had already left. I was officially out of my comfort zone. Inside, I was greeted by a woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Gray, head of household staff, with the kind of posture that could make anyone feel small. She spoke with professional courtesy, but her eyes said something else entirely. Caution. "Mr. Cole will meet you shortly," she said. "In the meantime, please avoid certain areas of the house." She didn't need to specify which ones. The warning was clear. When Adrian finally appeared at the top of the staircase, everything else faded. He didn't rush or try to impress. He just looked at me like he was measuring my resolve. "Welcome, Miss Johnson," he said evenly, stopping in front of me. Then came that small half-smile. "I hope you're not easily intimidated." I met his gaze, forcing my shoulders to stay steady. "Don't worry," I said, extending my hand toward him. "I'll be very professional." My expression carried both confidence and fear, and when he shook my hand, I knew this was more than just a job. By the next morning it was official. Mrs. Gray handed me a sleek folder with my new contract, full of pages I barely understood. "Temporary arrangement," she said, like she was trying to convince herself it was only that. Adrian hadn't appeared yet, which gave me a few precious moments to explore the quiet hallways. Everything was spotless, almost too perfect, like no one actually lived there. Even the air smelled like order and money. When Adrian finally entered the study, his presence filled the room instantly. "I appreciate you agreeing to this," he said, motioning for me to sit. "It's only for a few days. I want to see how my son responds." His tone was businesslike, but there was something uncertain behind it, a trace of vulnerability that didn't fit the billionaire image. I nodded, clutching the folder like a lifeline. "I understand," I said. "You're trusting me with something important." That afternoon I met Liam again in a smaller living room, filled with sunlight and expensive furniture that looked too fragile to touch. He sat quietly, eyes darting toward me like he wasn't sure what was allowed. I smiled, signed hello, and his entire expression shifted. He ran toward me, hugging my waist before I could react. For a second, I forgot every rule I promised to follow. The silence between us felt warm, not empty. When Adrian passed by the doorway and saw us, he didn't interrupt. He just stood there, unreadable, before quietly walking away. Mrs. Gray appeared moments later, clearing her throat as if to remind me that boundaries still existed. "Dinner will be served at 7, she said sharply. I nodded, pretending not to notice the small smile tugging at Liam's face. For the first time, the mansion didn't feel quite so cold. The morning started quietly, the kind of quiet that makes you second-guess every step you take. Mrs. Gray had left a schedule on my breakfast tray. Neat, color-coded, intimidating. Liam's lessons, meals, therapy sessions, everything planned down to the minute. When I entered the playroom, he was already there, sitting cross-legged on the floor, stacking blocks in perfect color order. It felt too precise for an 8-year-old, too controlled. "Good morning," I signed softly, half expecting him to ignore me. But Liam smiled and signed back, "Good morning, Miss Emma." My chest tightened a little, not from sadness, just surprise at how easily he remembered me. We spent the next hour playing small games that were really just disguised lessons. Every time he got a sign right, I'd pretend to get it wrong, and he'd laugh hard enough to forget he wasn't supposed to. That sound, silent laughter with his shoulders shaking, was better than any applause. Later, while we built a puzzle on the rug, Adrian walked in. He didn't say a word, just stood near the doorway watching his son. There was something almost disbelieving in his expression, like he was witnessing a miracle he didn't want to jinx. When Liam noticed him, he ran over and signed, "Look, Papa, we finished it." Adrian nodded, his eyes softening in a way I hadn't seen before. Then he looked at me. Not cold, not warm, just thoughtful. After he left, the air felt lighter somehow. Even the staff seemed less tense, maybe because they saw the boy smiling for once. As I gathered my notes, Mrs. Gray passed by again. "He hasn't laughed like that in years," she murmured, not quite meeting my eyes. I didn't say anything, just smiled and signed goodbye to Liam. For the first time since I arrived, I felt like maybe I belonged here, even if I wasn't ready to admit it yet. By the end of that week, the Cole residence didn't feel so frozen anymore. The silence was still there, but it wasn't the heavy kind. It was softer, filled with quiet sounds that hadn't existed before. Liam's footsteps, faint laughter, even a toy rolling across the marble floor. Sometimes I'd catch staff members peeking through the doorway, pretending not to smile when the boy signed something funny. It was progress, slow but real. Adrian often watched from a distance. He'd stand by the glass doors of his office or lean against the railing upstairs, just observing. At first it made me nervous. Billionaires weren't supposed to notice people like me. But after a while I realized he wasn't judging. He was studying, trying to understand how his son connected so easily with someone who had no script or protocol. It wasn't power that filled his eyes anymore. It was curiosity. One afternoon, as Liam napped on the couch beside a half-built Lego castle, Adrian walked in holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You look like you could use this," he said simply, placing one in front of me. I froze for a second, unsure if I was even allowed to accept. "It's not part of the job," he added with a faint smirk. "Consider it gratitude." I took the cup carefully, unsure which part of this exchange surprised me more, the coffee or his attempt at small talk. Moments like that started happening more often. A quick thank you after a long day. A shared laugh when Liam tried to teach him a sign and he got it hilariously wrong. Nothing big, nothing dramatic, just subtle warmth, the kind that sneaks in before anyone realizes it's there. And though I told myself it was all temporary, I couldn't ignore how natural it was starting to feel. Each day started to look a little different from the one before. The schedule, Mrs. Gray once guarded like a sacred text, slowly began to loosen. Liam still had lessons, but now there were moments of laughter mixed in. He started using signs I hadn't taught him, little jokes, his own versions of words. The kid who once avoided everyone was now correcting my signing and teaching new gestures he'd invented himself. He was proud of that, Adrian noticed. One evening, he walked in during one of Liam's lessons, pretending to be on his phone, but clearly watching. Liam was showing me how he'd renamed thank you to a quick flick of the wrist, his own shortcut. When I laughed and copied it, Adrian finally stepped forward. "That's not the real sign, is it?" he asked, trying to imitate it and getting it completely wrong. Liam covered his face, laughing silently, and Adrian's confused grin turned into something rare, genuine. That laugh changed something in the room. For the first time, I saw Adrian drop his usual guarded expression. He didn't look like the billionaire everyone feared. He looked like a dad trying his best. "You two make quite the team," he said quietly, almost to himself. I just smiled and told him Liam was the real teacher here. It was a small thing to say, but I noticed how his shoulders eased, like someone had just told him he was doing something right. Later that night, I passed by Adrian's study and heard him practicing sign language alone, repeating small phrases Liam had used that day. His movements were clumsy, but his effort was real. I didn't interrupt. I just watched for a moment from the hallway. It was strange, seeing this man of power learning a language built on patience. Gentle progress. For Liam, for Adrian, and maybe for me too. Adrian Cole wasn't a man people interrupted, but lately I caught him doing it himself. He'd pause meetings just to check on Liam's lessons or ask if I needed anything for the day. At first, I thought it was coincidence, but coincidences don't happen 4 times before lunch. He was watching, not in a controlling way, but like he was trying to figure out how something so simple could make such a difference. I started noticing his small changes too. The man who never smiled now lingered a little longer when Liam laughed. The father who used to give orders now asked questions, to me, to his son, even to Mrs. Gray. There was a quiet curiosity behind his calm voice, one that softened the edges of his usual authority. Sometimes I'd catch him standing at the door, hands in his pockets, pretending to check his watch while listening to us talk. One afternoon, while Liam practiced new signs for emotions, Adrian stayed longer than usual. "He used to avoid this," he said quietly. He'd shut down every time someone tried to make him express feelings. His tone was steady, but I could hear the weight behind it. "He's not avoiding anymore," I said. "He's learning to name things instead of hiding from them." Adrian nodded slowly, eyes fixed on his son. "You make that sound easy." "It's not," I replied, "but it's possible." After that day, he started asking more, about sign language, about teaching, about how people learn to open up. It wasn't small talk. It was genuine curiosity. There was something different in the way he listened, not as a boss or a billionaire, but as a man who hadn't heard real connection in a long time. And for the first time, I started wondering who Adrian Cole really was when the world wasn't watching. At Cole Industries, the mood had started to shift. People noticed that their usually strict and untouchable boss was different, less present in meetings, less focused on numbers. Adrian still led with precision, but there were moments when his thoughts seemed elsewhere. That kind of change doesn't go unnoticed in a world built on power, especially not by Victor Hale, his longtime business rival. Victor was the kind of man who thrived on weakness, or the illusion of it. When word reached him that Adrian Cole was spending more time at home than at the office, he started asking questions. "A personal matter," his assistant said. "Something about his kid." Victor just smiled. Perfect. For him, competition wasn't about money anymore. It was about leverage. And a man like Adrian, with a son and now an outsider in his house, that was new information worth keeping. Back at the mansion, I had no idea any of this was happening. My world revolved around Liam's lessons, small victories, and the quiet progress we made each day. Adrian seemed calmer too, still sharp, but different. He talked more about the future, about things that didn't involve profit margins or contracts. Sometimes I'd see him standing by the window after dinner, watching his son instead of checking his phone. Peaceful moments that made the rest of the world disappear. But peace never lasts long in places built on control. While Adrian started to let his guard down, someone else was already plotting ways to use it against him. And that calm I'd started to trust, it was about to crack in ways none of us could see coming. Over the next few days, things found their rhythm. Liam's laughter had become part of the background noise in that massive house, something even Mrs. Gray stopped pretending to ignore. Sometimes Adrian would join us during the lessons, sitting quietly at the corner of the room. He never interrupted, just observed, as if memorizing the way his son's hands moved when he felt understood. It wasn't awkward, it was almost comforting. One afternoon, while Liam built a tower with his blocks, Adrian tried to copy a few signs I'd been teaching. He wasn't great at it, but he was persistent. "You make it look easy," he said, glancing at me when his version looked nothing like mine. "That's because I've been practicing since I was 10, I replied with a laugh. "You'll catch up eventually." The small grin that crossed his face felt like progress in its own way, quiet, real, and unspoken. We started having small conversations outside of lessons. Nothing deep, just brief exchanges about coffee, books, or the chaos of the city. Sometimes he'd ask how my day was. Other times he'd say nothing at all, just sit nearby while Liam and I worked. It wasn't silence out of discomfort anymore. It was peaceful, like none of us needed to fill the air with unnecessary words. It was strange how easy that became. One evening, as I packed up my things, Adrian said, "You've made this house different." His tone was calm, but his meaning lingered. I looked at him, unsure what to say, so I just smiled. "Different's not always bad," I said lightly. He didn't answer, just nodded once before heading upstairs. But as I watched him go, I couldn't ignore the quiet realization that somewhere along the way, we'd stopped being strangers. It started with a simple request. Liam pointed to a picture book we'd been reading, one with a park, ducks, and sunlight. He signed, "Can we go?" At first I thought he meant another story, but when he repeated it, eyes full of excitement, I knew better. "The park?" I asked. He nodded eagerly, clapping his hands. It was such a normal thing for a kid to ask, and somehow that made it harder. That evening I brought it up carefully during dinner. Adrian sat at the head of the long dining table, reviewing documents while half listening to Liam's attempts to get his attention. "He wants to visit the park," I said gently. Adrian froze mid-page, glancing up at me. "Absolutely not." His tone wasn't harsh, just final. "It's not safe. Crowds, cameras, risks I can't take." Liam's smile faded instantly. He lowered his head, signing nothing. I waited a moment before answering. "He's not asking for much," I said quietly. "Just a few minutes of normal." Adrian's jaw tightened. "You think I haven't tried to give him that?" he said, frustration leaking through his calm. "The world doesn't give second chances when you're in my position." His voice softened, though. "I can't risk losing him." I hesitated, then replied, "Keeping him locked away isn't the same as keeping him safe." That struck something in him. He didn't argue this time, just sat there in silence, tapping his finger against the table. Finally, he sighed and leaned back. 1 hour. Controlled environment, full security detail. I smiled more in relief than victory. Liam, watching the exchange, didn't need words. His whole face lit up with joy. For the first time, Adrian didn't stop him. Lincoln Park was quiet that afternoon. Crisp air, soft light, and barely anyone around. Security had arrived first, spreading discreetly through the area. From a distance, no one would have guessed that a billionaire's son was feeding ducks under heavy surveillance. Liam stood by the pond, eyes wide as he tossed crumbs into the water. His silent laughter filled the air, contagious enough to make me forget the men in suits pretending to be joggers. Adrian watched from a few feet away, his hands tucked in his coat pockets. For once he wasn't looking at his phone or giving instructions. He was just present. When Liam ran up to show him the crumbs on his palms, Adrian crouched down, smiling softly. "Careful," he mouthed, helping him throw the rest into the pond. The way Liam leaned into him, that trust, said more than words ever could. I caught myself smiling, then quickly looked away. A few moments later, Adrian walked over and stood beside me. "He's happier," he said quietly, eyes still on his son. I didn't think I'd ever see that again. His voice carried that same rare warmth I'd noticed before. "You're the reason for that." I shook my head. "No, he just needed someone to listen." He glanced at me, a faint smirk forming. "You'd be surprised how few people know how." For a moment it felt like the world had slowed down. No noise, no distance, just peace. Liam waved from the water's edge, holding up a feather he'd found, his face glowing with pride. I waved back, laughing. Everything felt almost normal. Too normal, maybe, because even then a part of me couldn't shake the strange feeling that this calm wouldn't last forever. It happened fast, too fast, to make sense of it. 1 second, Liam was laughing at the ducks. The next, a jogger stumbled nearby, tripping over nothing. It looked normal at first, but then I saw his hand, the gun flashing under his sleeve. My stomach dropped. "Adrian," I said, barely above a whisper. He turned, eyes narrowing just as the first shot cracked through the air. Panic spread like wildfire. The security team reacted instantly, shouting into earpieces and moving in formation. Adrian grabbed Liam, pulling him close, but more men appeared from every direction, disguised as park staff, vendors, even parents. It was chaos disguised as everyday life. One of the guards yelled for cover, but Liam froze, staring wide-eyed at the gunfire, too shocked to move. Without thinking, I ran. I didn't plan it. I just moved. The sound of bullets was deafening, but all I could focus on was getting to him. I threw myself between Liam and the pond's edge, dragging him down behind a stone bench as splinters flew past us. "It's okay," I whispered, even though I knew he couldn't hear me. My body shook, not from pain, but from fear so strong it felt like electricity in my veins. His small hand clutched my arm like a lifeline. Out of the corner of my eye I saw Adrian, furious, focused, directing his men with precision I'd never seen before. He looked more soldier than CEO, but we were outnumbered. The van parked by the road screeched as its doors slid open, and I realized what was happening. This wasn't random. They weren't after money, they wanted Liam. My heart raced as I turned to Adrian, shouting the only thing I could. "They're taking him!" The chaos was unbearable. Sirens, shouts, gunfire echoing across the park. I could barely tell where the danger was coming from anymore. One of the security men dragged me backward, yelling something I couldn't hear over the noise, but then I saw it. 2 masked men breaking through the smoke, grabbing Liam from the ground. His small hands reached out toward me, eyes wide with terror. My heart stopped. I screamed his name, running forward before anyone could stop me. A bullet grazed my side, sharp and burning, but I didn't care. I reached out, fingertips brushing his sleeve for a split second, before one of the kidnappers struck me hard across the face. The world tilted. The next thing I knew, I was on the ground, the taste of blood in my mouth, watching as they shoved Liam into the van. He was signing frantically. "Help! Please!" Adrian's voice cut through the noise like thunder. "Liam!" He sprinted toward the van, 2 guards at his side, firing back at the attackers. But they were fast and too fast. Tires screeched as the vehicle tore away from the curb. Adrian kept running long after it was gone, shouting his son's name into the air like it could somehow bring him back. I tried to get up, but the pain in my side forced me down again. All I could do was watch him disappear into the distance. When the gunfire finally stopped, everything went quiet. The kind of silence that feels heavy, cruel. Adrian dropped to his knees beside me, his face pale, his suit streaked with dust and blood. "He's gone," I whispered, barely breathing. His eyes were wild, unfocused, like someone had just ripped the world from under him. "No," he said quietly, voice shaking for the first time. "Not for long." And in that moment, I saw it. The calm before the storm he was about to unleash. The hospital lights were harsh, too bright for how I felt. Everything smelled like disinfectant and fear. I woke up to the steady beep of a monitor and the weight of a bandage across my side. For a second, I didn't remember what had happened. Then it hit me all at once. The van, the gunfire, Liam's hands reaching out. My chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. When I turned my head, Adrian was sitting in the corner, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the floor. He looked nothing like the man I'd met in the hotel. His usually perfect suit wrinkled, his hair a mess, a small cut across his cheek. He hadn't slept. "You saved my son once," he said quietly, noticing I was awake. His voice was low, almost steady, but not quite. "Now I'll move heaven and earth to bring him back." There wasn't anger in his tone. It was colder than that. Controlled, determined, the kind of calm that scared me more than rage ever could. I tried to sit up, but the pain made me gasp. He was next to me in seconds, pressing me back gently. Don't, he said. You did enough. More than anyone ever has. I wanted to tell him it wasn't enough, that Liam was still out there, scared and alone, but the words wouldn't come. He looked away, jaw tightening. They think they can use him against me, he said. They think I'll negotiate. He paused, eyes dark and distant. They don't know me. Through the window behind him I saw smoke rising faintly in the distance, black plumes against the pale sky. Something was happening out there, and I didn't need to ask what. Adrian wasn't waiting for permission or ransom demands. He'd already started his war, and as terrifying as that was, I also knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wouldn't stop until Liam was home again. The room was dark, cold, and smelled like oil and dust. Liam sat on the floor with his knees pulled to his chest, the plastic ties cutting into his wrists. Every time he tried to move, the pain reminded him he wasn't home. There was a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, flickering like it might give up at any moment. The men guarding him didn't talk much. When they did, their voices were sharp, impatient, like they didn't know what to do with a child who couldn't answer back. He couldn't hear their threats, but he could see their faces, and that was enough to know he was in danger. He thought about Emma, how she never looked afraid when she spoke to him. She always smiled, even when people stared. He tried to remember that smile now, tried to breathe the way she'd taught him when he was nervous. In, out, but it was hard. His chest felt tight, and the silence pressed on him like a weight. Then, through the noise in his mind, he remembered his father's lessons, the secret signs they'd practiced in private. Old ones, gestures from a different version of sign language meant only for them. Danger, hide, stay calm. He started repeating them slowly, over and over, like a prayer. Maybe someone would see. Maybe someone would understand. His small hands moved in the air, invisible in the dark, but it gave him something to hold on to, hope. When the door opened, light flooded in, and he froze. One of the guards came in, muttering something before setting down food on a metal tray. Liam didn't move. He just kept signing quietly to himself. Dad will come, Emma will find me. The man didn't notice, just turned and left, locking the door again. The silence returned, heavy, but no longer empty, because now, for the first time since he'd been taken, Liam believed it. They would come for him. They released me from the hospital sooner than they should have. Maybe Adrian had arranged it, or maybe the doctors just didn't want to argue with a man who could buy the building. Either way, I was moved to a safe house, a quiet apartment with security outside the door and orders to rest. Rest was the last thing I could do. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Liam's face in that van, his hands signing help through the glass. Adrian came by once, looking more like a storm than a man. He told me they were following leads, that his team had eyes everywhere. You need to stay here, he said firmly. You're still a target. His tone left no room for argument, but his eyes betrayed something softer. Worry. Promise me, Emma, you don't leave this place. I nodded, but we both knew I was lying. I couldn't sit still while that boy was out there alone. That night, when the guards changed shifts, I made my move. I told Marco, the one with the bullet scar on his shoulder, that I needed fresh air. 5 minutes, he said, leaning against the wall. I stepped onto the balcony, feeling the cool wind hit my face. My ribs ached, but the pain didn't matter. Below me, the fire escape led down to the alley, dark and empty. I glanced back once. Marco was distracted with his phone. Perfect. I climbed down slowly, every movement sending a sharp pulse through my side. When my feet finally hit the ground, I hailed the first cab that passed. The docks, I told the driver, pressing cash into his hand before he could ask questions. My reflection in the window looked nothing like the woman who'd started this job. Pale, bruised, but determined. I didn't have a plan, just a promise echoing in my mind. If no one else will find him, I will. The docks were colder than I remembered. Wind came off the water sharp enough to sting, carrying the smell of rust and salt. I walked past rows of silent warehouses, each one more abandoned looking than the last. But the further I went, the less abandoned they seemed. Fresh tire marks in the dirt, a cigarette still burning on the ground. Someone had been here recently, and not the kind of people who clocked out at 5 o'clock. My heart was racing, but my mind felt strangely calm. Liam used to draw boats all the time, always with waves and ropes and little docks. He likes the idea of escape, Adrian had said once. That's what led me here. I passed one warehouse with shattered windows and almost kept going until I saw movement. A small shadow in the second-floor window, just enough to make me stop breathing. It was small, the shape of a child. I scanned the building carefully. 2 guards at the main entrance, both armed. Another walking the perimeter, checking his phone between rounds. No alarms, no lights inside. They thought no one would dare come alone. They were right, probably. But I wasn't thinking about odds anymore. I was thinking about Liam, and how terrified he must be. If there was even a chance he was inside, I wasn't leaving. Around the side, I found a broken loading dock window, half covered with boards. The glass was cracked, sharp, but wide enough for me to squeeze through. I took a deep breath, pressed my hands against the frame and climbed in. Pain flared across my ribs, but I didn't stop. Inside, the air was thick with dust and oil. I crouched behind a stack of crates, trying to adjust my breathing. Somewhere in this maze of shadows, a little boy was waiting, and I wasn't leaving without him. The warehouse was darker inside than I expected, lit only by cracks of light slipping through the boards. Every sound echoed. The drip of water, the shuffle of boots from somewhere down the hall. I moved slowly between crates, careful not to step on anything that would betray me. My hands trembled, but my mind was locked on one thought: find him. When I finally peeked through a gap between 2 wooden boxes, my heart nearly stopped. There he was. Liam sat against the far wall, wrists tied, head down. He looked smaller than I remembered. Pale, tired, but alive. 2 men stood a few feet away, arguing over a phone. They were distracted. I crouched lower, searching for his eyes, waiting for him to look up. It took a few seconds, but when he finally did, recognition flickered across his face like light breaking through clouds. He didn't move. Smart kid. But I saw it, that spark of hope. Carefully, I raised my hands and signed through the small opening. Little Wolf, I spelled out, using the nickname his father used. I'm here. For a second, he froze. Then his fingers twitched, slow and precise. 3 men, 2 guns, 1 outside. My throat tightened. He was counting them, analyzing the scene just like his father would. I signed back, good, stay quiet. When I signal, run to the door, I'll find you. His small nod nearly broke me. One of the men turned suddenly, and I dropped flat behind the crate, heart pounding. My pulse was so loud I was sure they could hear it. Their voices grew louder. Someone was coming to check the perimeter. I peeked again. Liam's eyes were wide, scared, but focused. He signed one more thing before the man returned. He's coming back. I pressed my hand over my mouth to steady my breathing. There wasn't much time left. The sound of boots echoed closer, steady, heavy, deliberate. I didn't need to see him to know this was someone different from the others, more confident, more dangerous. I pressed myself against the cold metal crate, trying to slow my breathing, but then a voice broke through the shadows, smooth, controlled, almost amused. Well, he said, looks like Adrian Cole's babysitter decided to join the party. I turned slowly, and there he was, Victor Hale. His face looked polished, like someone who enjoyed control a little too much. The gun in his hand didn't shake. Don't move, he warned, stepping closer. Behind him, Liam's eyes went wide. I shook my head slightly, mouthing, "It's okay," while raising my hands just enough to keep his focus on me. Every instinct screamed to run, but I stayed still. If I panicked, he'd look at Liam next. I couldn't let that happen. Victor smirked. You know, I was expecting Adrian himself. Instead, I get you, the woman who somehow made the untouchable billionaire human. His tone dripped with mockery, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. Tell me, Miss Johnson, he continued, lowering the gun slightly, what exactly did you do to him? I didn't answer. My silence seemed to amuse him even more. Ah, he said softly, so you matter. That makes this useful. Behind him, Liam was trembling, but I could see the determination in his face. He was waiting for me to give him a sign. Just one. I kept my eyes on Victor, forcing a steady breath. If you hurt him, I said quietly, you'll never make it out of here. He laughed, stepping closer until the barrel of the gun was inches from my forehead. You sound just like him, he said. Overconfident. I met his eyes, refusing to look away. No, I replied. Just certain. The first sound was a whisper of engines outside. Soft at first, then growing louder. Victor froze, glancing toward the window just as the light from approaching headlights flooded the cracks in the walls. What the... he started. But before he could finish, the entire building erupted with motion. The sharp pop of silenced gunfire, shouts from every direction, and then chaos. Adrian's tactical team had arrived, and they weren't negotiating. Move! One of Victor's men shouted, dragging him toward the back exit. The gun in his hand wavered as confusion spread through the room. I hit the ground, crawling toward Liam, who was still tied near the crates. It's me, I whispered, cutting the ropes with a shard of glass. His small hands gripped mine tight. We have to go. He nodded, eyes darting between me and the gunfire outside. I could hear Adrian's voice over the noise. Cold, precise, commanding. Alpha team, left flank. No one touches the hostages. His tone was iron, his control absolute. I looked up just in time to see him storm through the side door, unarmed but wearing a bulletproof vest. He moved with purpose, scanning the room like a man possessed. When our eyes met, something in his expression broke. Just for a second. "Emma, down!" he shouted, and I dropped as one of Victor's men fired toward us. The bullet hit a metal beam inches from my head. The fight ended as quickly as it began. Within minutes, the building was surrounded. The attackers pinned down, and Victor Hale dragged out in handcuffs, his perfect composure finally gone. Adrian rushed to Liam, kneeling beside him and pulling him into his arms. The boy clung to him, silent but trembling, his face buried against his father's chest. I sat back against the wall, too weak to move but unable to look away. It was over, or at least, it felt like it. The warehouse was filled with smoke and echoes, boots moving, radios crackling, men shouting commands. I watched from the corner as Adrian walked toward Victor, who was being held down by 2 guards. His hands were tied, but his smirk hadn't faded. "You came yourself," Victor said, voice mocking. "Didn't send your army to finish it for you." Adrian stopped just a few feet away, calm, his face unreadable. "You came after my son," he said quietly. "That was your last mistake." Victor chuckled, shaking his head. "You think this ends with me? You've made enemies, Adrian, powerful ones." His tone turned cold. "They'll come for you next. And when they do—" He didn't finish. Adrian grabbed him by the collar, pulling him up just enough to meet his eyes. "Then let them," he said, voice steady. "But you won't be here to see it." For a moment they just stared at each other, predator and prey, until Adrian let go and Victor hit the ground with a dull thud. The guards pulled Victor away, still muttering threats, but no one was listening. Adrian turned toward me and Liam. He was covered in dust, sweat and blood, but his eyes were steady now. He knelt down, brushing Liam's hair back, signing safe now. The boy nodded, clinging to him tightly. Adrian looked at me next, 1,000 things unsaid behind his exhausted expression. "You shouldn't have come," he said quietly. "You told me that once," I whispered. "Didn't stop you either." Outside, the sirens faded into the distance. The police took Victor. The team began clearing out, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was silence. Real, peaceful silence. Adrian reached out his hand to help me stand, his grip firm and grounding. As we stepped out into the night air, Liam's small hand slipped into mine. For the first time, it felt like all 3 of us were finally walking toward the same direction, together. Sunlight crept through the wide windows of the Cole residence, cutting soft lines across the marble floor. The air felt different now, lighter, almost alive again. I walked down the hallway, half expecting the silence to feel heavy like before, but it didn't. Somewhere down the hall, laughter echoed, faint, gentle, and unmistakably Liam's. The sound pulled a smile out of me before I even reached the room. When I stepped inside, Liam was sitting with one of the security guards, showing him how to spell his name in sign language. The big man was clumsy but trying, his movements awkward enough to make Liam giggle. It was the kind of sight that made the chaos of the last few days feel like a bad dream. Adrian stood nearby, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed but relaxed. For once there were no guards shouting, no phones ringing, just peace. He caught my eye and smiled faintly. "He's teaching everyone now," he said quietly. "The guards, Mrs. Gray, even the chef." I laughed softly. "You've created a monster." "Maybe," he said, glancing at his son, "but I'll take this version of him any day." His voice was softer now. No edge, no tension, just warmth. Watching them together, I realized how much had changed in such a short time. The house that once felt like a museum finally felt like a home. Later, while Liam ran off to play, Adrian poured 2 coffees and handed me one. "You're quiet," he said. I shrugged, still processing. He nodded, looking out the window. Me too. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us wasn't awkward anymore. It was safe, like we didn't need words to fill it. As the morning light grew brighter, I felt it fully for the first time. Peace, real and fragile, but ours. A few days later, the house was back to its quiet rhythm, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet anymore. It was the sound of calm after the storm, of people finally breathing again. Liam had started his day drawing at the kitchen table, crayons scattered everywhere. I sat beside him, helping pick colors while Adrian worked silently across the room. Every now and then his gaze would lift, not to supervise but simply to watch. When Liam finished, he jumped up and ran to his father, holding up the paper proudly. It was a picture of the three of us, hand in hand, standing in front of the house. Adrian smiled, something genuine that softened his entire face. "That's accurate," he said, voice quiet. Liam nodded and signed one single word, "Mum." My heart stopped for a second. Adrian's eyes met mine, surprised but not shocked, just thoughtful. He stood up, walked over and placed the drawing on the counter. "You gave him more than words," he said. "You gave him courage." His tone wasn't rehearsed or grand. It was real. "You changed his life." I opened my mouth to say it wasn't true, that it was him who did it, but he shook his head. "Stay," he said simply. "Not as an employee, as part of us." Liam ran over and hugged my waist, nodding eagerly as if to seal the offer. My throat tightened as I looked between them. The man who had built walls around his life and the boy who had learned to speak without sound. I smiled through the tears I didn't try to hide. "I'd like that," I whispered. Adrian exhaled softly, almost in relief. Liam signed home, and for the first time, that's exactly what it felt like. Months later, the Cole residence no longer felt like a fortress. The once guarded walls now echoed with laughter and the quiet hum of everyday life. Liam ran through the garden chasing his new puppy, signing commands between giggles. Adrian watched from the porch, coffee in hand, a peace in his eyes I'd never seen before. When he turned to me, his smile said everything words couldn't. No grand declarations, no dramatic moments. Just a simple truth between us. We'd all found what we were missing. Family wasn't something he built with money or power. It was something we created in silence, one small act of connection at a time. Sometimes life brings us people we never expected, and somehow they become the ones who change everything. Emma didn't plan to meet a billionaire, and Adrian didn't plan to let anyone into his world. Yet one act of kindness turned into something that healed them all. It makes you wonder, would you risk your comfort for someone you barely know just because your heart told you to, or would fear keep you silent? Tell us in the comments, what would you have done in her place? Don't forget to like, subscribe and share this story. Someone out there needs a reminder that love in any form can speak louder than words. Subscribe for more emotional stories that touch the heart and remind us, connection changes everything.